setup, I want to thank you all for coming for a morning in December. Cold, actually not as cold today, but thanks for coming out. I also want to thank David. A couple of weeks ago, this was after we had decided on December 8th, I sent him this email and I said, there's a meeting I just cannot get out of. And I try to get out of every meeting I can, and this one I just simply could not get out of. And so I said, I need to switch to December 15th, which was complete bullshit, to do this for David at the last minute. And he just sidestepped that BS really well, and I appreciate that. So thanks, David. I want to acknowledge my colleague in this, Carl Bergstrom, because we've been thinking about this for the last several years. We've been thinking a lot about bullshit and what the role of bullshit is in society, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I think we know right now, at least in this world that we live in, we see bullshit sort of everywhere. But I want to just sort of start with my assertions that I want to talk about today, since we're a Creative Mornings event. And also I should say something about context. So when we teach these kinds of tools for combating and refuting BS, context is everything. So you can take a visualization and you can zoom in, zoom out, you can manipulate arguments, you can manipulate statistics, but we teach students to look for the context as a way of refuting. And so that'll come out as I talk about today. And after I talk, I think the format is that we'll have an open discussion. So have lots of questions. Hopefully some of these things will, some of the slides and discussions will provoke some things. But here's my assertion that I want to make today. So I think that bullshit really is a creative endeavor. From the thinking that we've been doing a lot about it, from philosophy and mathematics, it really is, it's creative in both the creation of BS, and I will say that not all BS is bad. I mean, when my friend tells me that, my haircut looks good for it could be that it doesn't look good, or we use BS, the onion is a perfect example of where BS can be really useful. And we'll talk a little bit about that in sort of at the end, so one of the questions I want to ask. But the spotting BS, there is a creative process, but the class that we built is specifically around the spotting and the refuting. And I don't know how much creative process there is in spotting. I want to think that there is a formula by which we can spot BS. The refuting that side, though, is where I think a lot of the creativity comes from. And I know there's a lot of people from the creative industries here, obviously, and I'd be interested to hear about how you use BS, maybe in good ways, and how you can use your creative talents to hopefully refute a lot of the BS that we're seeing out there. So let me start with just a very simple, backtrack to, in the animal kingdom, BS, by the way, is not a human-centric endeavor. We have lots of examples of animals that we talk about that have deception and lying and maybe something you could maybe qualify it as BS. One of my favorite is the mantis shrimp. This is a crustacean that has this punch that's so strong. If you've never read about these kind of mantis shrimp, they've been known to punch through aquarium glasses. They're really tiny, but they hit with, I don't know exactly how hard they hit, but one of the things that they have to do when they molt and they lose their protective skeleton, they have to BS their the predators out there by looking strong. So they have videos of them sort of pretending that they're ready to box out, but they really are just sort of BSing. And we see this, in the capuchin mountain monkeys and a lot of the primate arm of the tree of life. And these animals are actually quite good at lying to their colleagues about predators and snakes being nearby, and so they'll tap things and pretend that there's a snake, and then they'll grab the food that was supposed to be for the whole group. Of course, crows. The interesting thing about the work that's been done on crows is that they may be one of the only animals that have a theory of mind. So that's really important to be able to bullshit. You kind of have to know what the other one is thinking. And that theory of mind, I think, is one of the most interesting aspects of sort of the role of misinformation in animal signaling. And I bring these things up because I want you to think more broadly about BS and what misinformation is, not just from our own human, not just from the sociological context that we're used to. But I'm going to just start with the sort of human side because we know this pretty well. Carl and I think of bullshit sort of breaking into two major types. There's the old school bullshit. That's the kind of bullshit that we see everywhere. And so I'll try to make fun of everyone in this room if I can by the end of the talk. But let's go ahead and make fun of the startup community real quick. So I see this kind of statement all the time in front of the VCs. Our collective mission, and maybe not verbatim, but this one is something I pulled from one of these talks. Our collective mission is to refunctionalize customer-driven solutions for leveraging underutilized portfolio opportunities. I have no idea still what that means, but apparently it gets you lots of money because that particular company is well-funded. But there's this new kind of bullshit that I spend my time teaching at I'm in an information school, so we're sort of a mix of technologists and also philosophers and social scientists. We sort of collide sort of technology with designers, so people that are designing interfaces, those ethicists, those are the people that are thinking about the ramifications of the technology that we have out there. And that's what an information school is. We're sort of, this sort of like basically this interface between humans and technology. And the aspect that I teach in technology is around data, and this is something I've been doing for a long time, and this is the kind of bullshit that I'm seeing everywhere, even in our general news. Instead of seeing sort of this language manipulation, and this is, the old school bullshit is what people are usually pretty good at calling BS. Some of you laughed because you can sort of see through that kind of BS. You're used to the car salesman kind of pitch, but it's this kind of BS that we're finding that most people aren't so good at. While short of Bonferroni corrections, et cetera, we sort of assume that because there is sort of a p-value or there's some fancy algorithm or statistic applied to it, that it must be right. So the goal that we have for this class was to say, let's move away from this, let's move away from the black box intimidation of the data world and teach people how to focus on just the interpretation of the data that comes out and the data that goes in. And we are, I hope we're successful with this, but I think we can teach the general public to call bullshit on these kinds of statements as well. All right, just a quick little context for how this class came together. So I teach, I co-direct and co-found this lab at the University of Washington called the Data Lab, and it's this mix of economists, social scientists. Oops, sorry, I keep moving. I don't know if it's something I'm doing. I apologize for the in and out. But what we do is we look at large-scale data and the implications, social implications. And one particular area is something I call the science of science. We study innovation in science. We look at the types of teams that lead to new discoveries, that lead to new new companies that come out of the work that comes out of science. We study a lot of the sociology of science. We study economic development in countries and sort of the technologies that can lead to those kinds of developments. We look at social media. We look at information visualization and the techniques and the design that can lead to better interpretations of the data and better sort of storytelling in good ways. But here's what I'm finding. In these last 5 years that I've been directing this lab and developing data science curricula at the University of Washington, I found that this sort of encapsulates what we do in the STEM fields. They know, I can teach them how to calculate a Jacobian transformation, how to find a Jacobian transformation. The students and most people and engineers, a lot of you maybe work with engineers, they're great. They're really, really great at the mechanics. And I don't mean to demean all engineers. I consider myself partly an engineer as well. But this is what we can do at the education level. This is what we're doing. But I want to actually bring the humanities to this world. Carl and I want to bring what you learn in like the class, when you learn about Macbeth and you sort of talk ad nauseum about the symbolism of the birds that Shakespeare was trying to sort of convey in Macbeth, that sort of interrogation of these plays and everything that you sort of learn in philosophy courses and a lot of the humanities courses, we want to bring that to STEM and sort of teach that. Because really what students are really poor at, they're really poor at sort of, they can do the mechanics, but they can't think of manipulative experiments, and they can't think of ways of sort of recasting arguments. They're good at those mechanics, and that's what I'm afraid of if we're going to be run by a world of AI and have these engineers encoding these things into AI. How do we get them to sort of learn beyond that? Now, they're all excited about the new self-driving world, all the things that AI are doing. They get really excited about this. They don't really care about the sort of other implications, and that's sort of what our goal is. And I always come to class with like Did you see? And did you see, that these smart mapping technologies that we use all the time, we're driving cars recently into the fires. So we know that, that the technology has these fallibilities. And so the idea is that in a lot of the classes, a lot of things that we're doing, we're teaching students to go beyond the mechanics of the technology and start to think about things that I think designers and the creative world thinks much more about. I mean, even things like a search engine. Everyone sort of, at least I get the sense that my students, and I think even myself at times, we sort of search on Google or Bing, we do a search and we think it's true. So like we do these examples where Carl and I say, okay, if I was just to make up something, I could make up something like, do vaccinations cause shaken baby syndrome? And we put that up into the search engine. Well, you would find answers, even though this is preposterous, it's ridiculous. There's no, the shaking baby syndrome is not caused by vaccinations, but you're going to find sites that talk about this. But the medical community doesn't have the antidote to go and respond to this. And so everything that we see on the web is only what's been created, and mostly what's been created, not mostly, but a lot of what's been created just isn't true, and we don't have the resources to have the antidote. So always be leery is something we say of what you find in search engines. And also like things, even the great technology around our language translators, this is just one of many examples. If for those that know Turkish, not Turkey, I mean we had Turkey in Thanksgiving, but you have, if you put in Turkish into a translator, you immediately start to see the biases that are built already into these algorithms. So if you were to translate into English, you'd see that he is a doctor, she is a nurse, and there's all of these sort of these biases that exist. I mean, and actually some translations don't make any sense. Like Spanish, you go, es un doctor, es un hamster. I mean, none of these, sometimes they don't make sense. The point here is that there's limitations to the technology. And so this movement towards sort of consideration of all these problems with technology sort of led to actually this class. And we got sidestepped, Carl and I, in our personal lives and also everything that we're seeing in our professional lives in science, that we just like many of us know, we really are drowning in bullshit. So we were more, I spent all my time thinking about all these subtleties of technology, and what I realized is that all this sort of BS was right in front of us. And this is something that we start some of our classes with, or when we're meeting with a group, we sort of go through things. We try to make fun of everyone, like I said. We already know, this is the low-hanging fruit, we already know that politicians are unconstrained by facts. And we know that, even my world of science is now being conducted by press release, which concerns me, and it's sort of degrading the integrity of what we're doing. I live in the world of higher education. I can promise you it rewards sometimes bullshit over analytic thought. Startup culture, as we know, elevates to high art. We're good at that, I think, but, sometimes it has a purpose. And I know there's advertisers out there, so I want to make sure that when we make fun of you, a generation ago, advertisers used to feed us straight up bullshit, but now we use irony as a Trojan horse, and instead of, you kind of see where I'm going here, but then here's my favorite, that administrative activity often amounts to a sophisticated exercise in the combinatorial reassembly of bullshit. All right, but the thing is, most people on Facebook, the problem is, they're mostly just spreading BS, and actually there's numbers now to support this. This was just some of the things that really disturbed me. Shortly after the election, Craig Silverman, who's been doing some good work in this area, looked at the 19 primary news operations in the US and looked at their engagements on Facebook. And if you compared them to items that have been identified as fake news, and these are not even all of them, this is just sort of a handful of some of the top ones, before the election, there were more interactions, according to this data, with fake news items than there were these 19 mainstream news sources. And that's something to be worried. Now this one just came out, this is another demonstration. The British Medical Journal of Medicine is one of the top medical journals in the world. They just put out the Christmas issue. Now it's supposed to be a parody, and they came out with a paper that said that science now shows that there is this thing called man flu, and the symptoms for men that get flu result in more complaining by men. And then they show all this sort of, this is a kind of a British inside joke. If you've been, they have this joke all the time that men are such complainers, or when they get the flu or get the cold. And they put this article out with these sort of citations. Well, it got picked up by mainstream news, CNN, LA Times. It got picked up on all these places. And I don't want to attack journalism too much because we need it more than ever. But if this stuff, if parodies are getting out and then spreading as if they're real news, imagine how easy it is when the news is much more subtle. Now, the other thing that concerns me, those that are following the net neutrality thing, it's really concerning to me as someone who lives in the technology world. But what's more concerning even than net neutrality, my friends would say nothing is worse than net neutrality issue right now, but even worse than that are all the fake comments and the stealing of identities. And so there's all this misinformation that goes beyond even the fake news. Now, the thing that concerns me the most, though, of everything, and there's many examples of these. There's a nice paper that's showing all of the leaders that have been fooled by fake news. Now, this was a fake news. You can read the item. You can immediately see this is just preposterous. There's grammatical issues. They even used the wrong defense minister for Israel. But basically, the story from this news source, supposed news source, was that Israel was threatening Pakistan if they go into Syria. Now, this was taken down, and it was completely refuted, and there was no question it was fake. But it wasn't soon enough. The Israeli defense minister actually took this as real news and tweeted a very threatening, sort of sword-rattling tweet saying that Israel forgets that Pakistan is a nuclear state too. So this is sort of like fake news can be funny. It's it can be entertaining. It can even be somewhat innocuous, like the BMJ article that goes around. But this is real serious. And so that's what sort of led to the class. And this is one quote from that Mark Galati that really stuck with Carl and I, which is that we can do all sorts of. We can throw technology at this. We can try to make our legal system adapt to this, although I don't think we can with our First Amendment, if we care about First Amendment rights. But we need to teach people the information consumer themselves, how to respond. And that's where the class came from. You can go to our course. You can follow us on our Twitter feed. We do sort of keep this conversation going. We continually put content out and case studies. We make it all freely available. And we actually have a real syllabus. People still wonder if it's a real thing. It really is a thing. We have all sorts of content we pull. We have 40 hours of lectures that we talk about and continuing to add to that. And this is sort of our philosophy again, that we don't want people to be intimidated by the algorithm and the black box. We want people to focus in on the data and the output of the data. Now, it did sort of take off, and that's sort of maybe the silver lining in some of this misinformation environments that we live in. There's projects that are now trying to respond, not just us. But the coolest part is that there's more than 60 universities now that have started to adopt the kind of course content that we developed to teach students how to combat misinformation. And so this part is what's most exciting to us. So now let me get back to this assertion. I'm going to now sort of quickly go through some examples of the creative process of what I mean here. Now, the creative process, I don't want to spend too much time in teaching people how to create bullshit. I think there's enough bullshit out there. Let's just let that sit on the side. I mean, you can just look at the creativity of the Macedonia teenagers in Velis, Macedonia, who were creating a lot of the fake news that were getting clicked on, and they were making hundreds of thousands of dollars. A lot of fake news is being driven, probably, my claim that it's as much, if not more, by economic incentives. There's lots of money to be made in creating fake news rather than just the propaganda. So that's sort of the fake news factories. There's a creative process there, but I'm not going to spend time on that. I'm going to just mention a few things that you can use. There's a whole bunch of things that we have on tips for spotting bullshit. And I only have time to go through a couple, so I'm just going to mention a few things. And now, of course, we're always talking about questioning the source, and we spend a lot of time in class teaching people how to correctly check sources. Like an academic article, if you're a journalist, how do you know if it's a legitimate article? We talk about how you can do that. We talk about not being intimidated. That's that black box philosophy. I think that we can teach anyone with common sense to sort of combat a lot of the new school BS. And the one that the students love more than anything, if a claim seems too good or too bad to be true, it probably is. I have students running up to me before class, almost every class, saying, I found something that sounds too good to be true. and they're usually right. And just basic questions like, I mean, these are the three questions. If you got nothing from the talk today, it would be just like, who's telling me this? How do they know it? And what do they have to gain from it? These are sort of really three basic questions that I use in my professional world, in science, and in peer review, and it's really effective, I think, in people's personal life. Now, we could talk ad nauseum about the confirmation bias, and that's sort of the whole set of lectures all by itself, but something to be aware of. So I'm going to just start with an example of unfair comparisons. Now, if I wanted to compare the sweetness of two different of apple juice and Minute Maid orange juice. Of course, this is sort of a joke that we sort of play in class. We sort of set it up like a real statistical problem. We have 21 people that take the test, and we find that there's this the conclusion here is that fresh juice is sweeter. But of course, what am I doing here? I'm comparing apples to oranges. And we see this all the time in the way that we deliver content and in the ways that we interpret content. So of course, this one was, for whatever reason, both the Democrats and the Republicans were really fixated on how many people came to the inauguration. And this was written by a news stream, and if you look, it says, the mainstream media has ignored the fact that 8 times more people watched Trump's inauguration over streaming video than Obama's. So think about that for a moment. This is an apples to oranges problem here, so that's your clue. What's going on there? Their claim. What's wrong with their claim? Sorry? Time. Good job. Yes. So, if you go back and you look at streaming content, back to when Obama had his first inauguration, streaming video was not a thing. So you can't make the argument that there are 8 times more people at the inauguration. And we make, by the way, we try to make the class as nonpartisan as we can, even though it's easy pickings in many areas. But here, I mean, there was no streaming video. But my favorite line in this story, I mean, this is just sort of a little side note. It said, but the press left out, the mainstream media left out some important differences. Most important, millions watched the inauguration on TV and streaming media, probably millions in Russia alone. So that was kind of funny. But another way to think about this is, and this is part of the sort of creativity and refutation, what's the best refutation that Carl and I could think of? We talk a lot of times hours for what the best refutation. Here's the refutation for this, even beyond the streaming video. And that is that Trump must have had the zero carbon vote as well. Using the same logic and the same argument as streaming video, he must have had the zero carbon vote because he had far more people driving Teslas to his inauguration than Obama. There weren't Teslas in 2008 that I know of people were driving. Maybe there was. But it's these kinds of ways of sort of trying to squash an argument as quickly as possible with something we call reductio ad absurdum. And I'll talk about it in just a second. All right, so the other thing is, a lot of you make data graphics, and we make mistakes, and I make mistakes, but I want people to be more aware of the ways that data graphics and just infographics in general can be misleading. So there's many, we show many examples in our class, but this particular one was, a graphic that was a response to the Florida Stand Your Ground law in 2005. And the idea there was to look at whether deaths had increased or decreased. But and you can see the black line is decreasing precipitously after Florida enacted this Stand Your Ground law. Can anyone see the problem? Yeah. Breaking the sort of 2,000-year convention of putting the zero on the bottom is not usually the way to gain truth with your readers. So this is one of many things, and we can show you many other ways of manipulating your access. Now, this is the only climate change chart you'll ever need to see, according to the National Review. If you zoom out far enough, you'll see that there has been no temperature increase, so why are we worried about all this climate stuff? If you took the same data from NASA and you actually zoomed in, you would see the incline that we have been seeing in temperature, which is pretty dramatic, given the climate scientists talk about 2-degree differences having huge effects. If you look, so you see that here's the data, but I'm asking you to think creatively. How would you respond to this to squash the argument? So before I show you my favorite reductio ad absurdum of this, think about this for a second. How would you show those individuals that believed the National Review, how, in addition to doing this, my favorite reductio was from Bloomberg. So what they did is they said, if you believe that first picture, if you take time on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and you zoom out far enough, you can prove that time does not march forward. And so this right here completely squashed this misinformation just beautifully. So the point here is that we want to use some of these creative ways of squashing other than just showing the problems. So this is what I want to end with is this idea, the ways of refuting bullshit. Now we have many lectures on how to refute bullshit, but I'm going to give you my very favorite method. My very favorite method is reductio ad absurdum. It takes the most creativity, it takes the most thought, but it can be by far the most effective and argument-crushing method you can use in refuting arguments. Now, comedians do this beautifully. Artists do this beautifully. The creative industry knows this. They don't have a fancy Latin term for it. They do this already. But what I'm trying to do is bring this to science, because scientists sometimes aren't as funny, and I'm trying to get them to be a little bit more funny. So let me give you an example. So Nature is the premier journal in the world to publish scientific results, and this was published in 2004. They claimed, according to a model that they developed, the authors of this, that if you looked at the sprint times of male and female, you can see there's been a decrease, and that females have been dropping faster than males, and if you create a model and extrapolate from that model, that by the year 2156, women sprinters will be going faster than men. Now that may actually be true, but my favorite reductio was from a high school class in Texas that wrote a letter to Nature. And there was another individual as well, so they weren't the only one. But they wrote a letter, and they said, well, if you buy that argument, a much more interesting race will occur in about 2300, when the Olympics will be recording negative times. And that will be a challenge for timekeepers. And it completely crushed the problem, the sort of real problem with the model that they were using. They should have never been extrapolating with a linear model, but they did in one of the best journals in the world, and high schoolers were able to call this out. So let me show you the last one, and then we'll open this discussion. This is my favorite reductio in the field of clinical research. We have lots of them. So in the clinical world, fMRI is used to compare different brains, whether you want to compare like a schizophrenic brain from a non-schizophrenic brain, and you look at areas of the brain, you look at oxygenation levels, and you can see where the differences are in activity. Now, this tool has been used, extensively around the world in the medical field, and it's published hundreds, if not thousands, of papers based on these methods. But there's a big problem here. The algorithms used to infer the patterns often generate high rates of false positive. And that has been concerning to an author that had to think of a way of explaining to their field what that means. And there are big consequences to this. So, because many claims regarding these localizations may really be bullshit. We may have published and come to conclusions about our behavior, about how our brains work, based on a technology that was fraught with false positives. So how does one make a convincing argument? Think about the reductio again. Well, this is how it was done. Being from Seattle, you would appreciate the use of a salmon. They got a dead salmon. I think they were pretty sure it was, well, I know it was dead. You can see it's laying there on ice. And they did exactly what they do in all these human experiments. The salmon was shown, and they actually did this. This was not hypothetical. They took the salmon, they rented time on the fMRI. The salmon was shown a series of photographs depicting human individuals in social situations with specific emotional valence, either socially inclusive or socially exclusive. The salmon was asked to determine which emotion the individual in the photo must have been experiencing. And there are the photos there. As you can see, the salmon lit up. I don't know if you can see totally, but there's a dark area in the middle and a slightly different area on the left image. And this was their conclusion. Either we have stumbled onto a rather amazing discovery in terms of a postmodern ichthyological cognition, or there is something a bit off with regard to our uncorrected statistical approach. Now, this shook the field. This one paper, this one presentation, shook the entire field. And it was a beautiful demonstration of how you could make your point to the entire field with an experiment that didn't require anything technical. It didn't require fancy mathematics. It didn't require fancy technology. So that's what I challenge you as the creative industry, is to come up with ways to refute all the misinformation that's out there with the abilities that you have. It's the creative industry, it's the humanities, it's the things that we learn in those classes and in those kinds of endeavors that I want to bring to science. And that's why I wanted to engage with the creative, and I'm going to continue to engage more and more, because I think it's there that they can help us figure out how to spot BS, how to refute BS. And what I want to end here as a challenge as we go into our 5-minute discussion is to think about ways in which BS is okay. So there are parts in our industry, all of our industry, where creating bullshit is okay. I want you to think about ways in which bullshit is used and used improperly in your field, and techniques that maybe you have learned. Now, you can talk about whatever you want, but that's what I was hoping to sort of engage with you. And given the presentation that was given right before about the carbon footprint, I think that's a great project. And it sort of goes with something Carl and I have been thinking a lot about too. As Seattleites, we care a lot about our carbon footprint. But I also want us to care a lot about our bullshit footprint. So we all create bullshit every day, and my challenge to you is to refute as much bullshit as you create. So with that, you can follow us at Colin Bull. We try to keep our Twitter feed pretty live. If you have things, send them to us. You can email us if you have questions, or if you have examples. We love examples. And you can go to our website. So I guess we now go to discussion, and then we can open up for questions. So thanks for listening.